it can be hard to know when your loved one is actually dying. You know, it's a very fair question to ask. When do we begin dying? You might say at the moment of birth, we begin dying. There are many different ways to answer that question. We are all dying. On some level, that is true. That's not a very helpful answer. I think within the context of serious illness, there are differences between the life expectancy of a patient living with, say, advanced cancer, metastatic cancer, for example, or end stages of heart failure, lung issues, et cetera. There comes a time where that person, where it's not an abstract question of whether they're dying, their body starts to change. So with that, let me just say it can be difficult to know. This is when it can be helpful to ask your physician, but also a very helpful time for the patient to check in with themselves and the family to ask the patient. I've noticed over the years that very often people who are dying have an internal sense that the end is coming soon. So sometimes it's just simply a matter of asking the patient. But one way or another, there are things that you can look for. Outside, as a family member, as a loved one, as a caregiver, we can watch for signs that death is coming soon. So in the context of serious illness, for example, if the patient is increasingly not able to get out of bed, as either asleep on the couch or in bed for more than half the day, consistently, not once or not every once in a while, but every day. And if you look over the course of weeks or months, it's more and more fatigued, more and more sleepy. And again, if they're not getting out of bed for more than half the day, one way or another, that usually means that we're getting closer. Sometimes that means that the pain is undertreated or something else. So these aren't hard and fast rules, but rather sort of the observations that can give you a sense. So that progressive fatigue, unable to be out of bed for much of the day. Appetite. So weight loss is very common and a lot as death comes closer. And this is a very, very difficult one, guys, because in so much of life, food is nutrition. And if you want to live, you eat. It's that simple. But there comes a time in the life of a body where food is a problem. And when you're getting close to death, when we begin the sort of active dying process, and I'll talk about that in a second, but as we're getting closer to the end, our ability to process food is compromised. So you can artificially force food into someone through a tube or through the vein, but that is rarely a good idea. In fact, our guts are very smart, and when they can't process food or drink, they won't want it. So if your patient is not eating, is in fact sometimes even turned off by food, it's important to realize that that is the illness speaking. That's not their fault. It's not that they're not trying. It's that they're listening to their body, and their body is being smart. Again, when it can't process food, it will reject it. And that is something, generally speaking, in the context of serious illness, to respect. Again, we can hurt people by forcing food into somebody. So another sort of sign that the dying process is getting closer is this idea that less and less able to eat, less and less interested in it, weight loss no matter what they do. Other things to keep an eye out for are confusion. Delirium is the medical word for this. So if you start noticing that your loved one, that they're not quite here sometimes they're fully present, and then sometimes they think it's, 1980, or they don't know what time it is or where they are. The confusion can creep in towards the end of life. And that usually means that that can be caused by many things too. And it's always worth a conversation with your doctor, but that's another sign that the end may be near. So when we find ourselves in the sort of active dying phase, that usually means within the final days of life. And this is when the body is really starting to shut down. And you can see whether the GI tract shuts down, or their thinking shuts down, or their blood pressure gets out of whack. But you can, one way or another, you get a sense of the orchestra that is the body is coming undone. In the final days, it gets increasingly obvious. And it's important to note this because it can feel like an urgency. Oh my gosh, mom's not eating anymore. It's emergent. We've got to make her eat. Or a frantic need to get to the hospital. But if we're in an active dying phase, and if dying is expected, as with any terminal illness, usually this is a time to be calm and not a time to be rushing to the ER. Maybe time to invoke hospice if they're not already in the mix. But the active dying phase is different from the rest of life in important ways. And there are signals that your body will send, like I've just laid out here. But I don't want to send the note that you as a loved one should be able to interpret all this and know. This is, again, back to having a conversation with the doctor and trying to read these cues. This is often a matter of a conversation more than you having to decide that mom is dying soon. But these are these things that can give us a sense.
每一个人呢，死亡的过程呢都不会是相同的。他们可能睡觉的时间变多了，眼睛闭着的时间变多了。他们开始对这个周遭的环境呢开始脱离，他们可能对周遭的环境、对周遭的人群呢不再感到兴趣。他们可能进食减少，甚至呢不进食。他们的呼吸呢也许会变得不规律，体温呢忽冷忽热，皮肤可能变色。那除了身体方面的这些变化呢，这个濒死的人他们可能会经历到疼痛，身体上的疼痛、精神上的疼痛、情绪上的痛苦。那病人呢在面对死亡的时候呢，他们可能会觉得非常的恐惧、害怕，甚至会觉得忧郁，因为不知道这个过程有很多的未知数。那两个建议呢，就是如果病人还有表达能力的时候呢，家人就应该要去了解，如果还不了解，事前没有问的话，去了解，在这个生命的尽头呢，对病人来说，什么是对他们最重要的？有没有什么未完成的事情，想要见的人，想要说的话？那帮助他们完成这些心愿。那第二个呢，可以帮助的呢，就是帮助这个主要的照顾者。因为呢，照顾这个病人呢，面对死亡的病人呢，对照顾者来讲呢，是非常的压力非常的大，非常的劳心劳累。那通常呢，照顾者都会把病人的需求摆在第一，而忽略自己的情绪上，还有自己身体上的需要。那所以这个时候呢，家人可以做的就是给这个照顾者呢提供很大的关怀和支持。
是的，一些症状家人是需要了解的，尤其是在病人在大概要走临终的时候，他们的呼吸啊、心跳啊、血压都会不一样，会改的。他们的皮肤会变冷或者是变热，有的时候你摸上去会很潮湿，或者是他们的面色会很苍白，有的时候看起来病人也很混乱，很恍惚，甚至呢，他们慢慢的不再去吃东西，也不想喝水。我有很多的病人，尤其是我们中国人的文化，就觉得，哎呀，不能让他饿着，不能一定要让他给他吃东西，就算病人已经吞咽有困难了。已经在天天睡觉了，还要把他们弄醒，然后给他吃东西。我想这是令到病人会感觉到难受，或者是更加加重他的痛苦的一件事情。所以呢，不要强迫他吃东西。我想，最好的方法呢，就是保持病人他们口腔的湿润，不要让他们太干燥。还有一些我感觉的建议就是，每个人死亡真的都不一样。有的人慢慢的平安的离开，有的人会走得很快，非常突然，让家人觉得措手不及，甚至都来不及告别。所以了解死亡的过程，像这些变化，早一点告诉家人，或者是早一些得到这方面的资料，做好准备是很重要。而且我还感觉到，就是当病人即将离开的时候呢， 作为家人最重要的还是要陪在他们身边，对他们说一说话，安慰病人，最好呢能够保持房间可以通风了，安静了，灯不要开得太亮，总之就是说让病人有尊严的离开，也可以给病人一些药物，比方吗啡了，让他们减轻一些痛楚，呼吸也会平缓一些，不会太痛苦。
Family members in the act of dying, when it's really at the end, again, the final hours or days, and like you guys are saying, there are changes in the breathing, the person will be in and out of consciousness, changes to the circulation, the extremities might get very cold, hands and feet first, sometimes start turning a little bit blue. This usually means that death is coming very soon, final days, final hours. And we always say that hearing is one of the last things to go. So presume that your loved one can hear you, even if they're not talking to you. So it's okay to talk to them, tell them you love them, tell them it's okay to go, tell them you'll be okay, tell them what feels right, but presume that they can hear you for their sake and for your own. I think it can be a beautiful thing. But this is the point here, guys, is this is in these final moments, this is a time to just be with your loved one, not so much a time to do a bunch of things. Oftentimes we'll be frantically trying to change a situation or do something, and you miss this very, very precious moment, these final breaths. And on that note, we're trying to cover a lot of ground here, and these are generalisms, guys. And this is why it's so important to have hospice or palliative care involved along the way to help educate in real time. And hospice in particular are very good at this. But one thing to note here, because it comes up again and again and again, is sometimes, for reasons that aren't clear to me anyway, that the person, the dying person, may need to be alone for their final breath. I think a lot of families want to be present at the bedside for that final breath. And that's a beautiful impulse. And oftentimes that works okay. But one thing we've noticed is that sometimes when the family member dares to finally go to the bathroom or step outside or get a drink of water for themselves, that's when the patient finally lets go and dies. And if you're not prepared for that, it can be very upsetting, because you may have sat at the bedside for days, not sleeping, wanting to be there for every moment. And it's just right when you finally turn away, they go. So that's not a problem. That's just a natural phenomenon. I don't pretend to understand it, but it's really important that families get this so that they don't feel somehow shortchanged. And it's an encouragement too, to take care of yourself, get that breath of fresh air, kiss your loved one. That they may need to leave. They may leave once you leave the room. It's an important note. It happens a lot.
进食呢，也真的是觉得他们是一种爱的表现。那我们看到不少病人呢，到了要面临死亡的时候呢，他们不再进食，可是呢，家里人就很紧张，那决定说要用喂食管开始用喂食管。那这其实呢，都是增加病人的痛苦。那我们的建议就是说，家人不要把自己的希望还有自己的价值呢投射在病人身上，那让病人呢尊重他们的意愿。如果病人本身并不希望有喂食管然后来进食的话，那尊重他们的意愿。
是的，我在想，中国人有一句话叫做"好心办坏事"，这是我们中国人常常说的。你的意愿是好的，你想你所爱的人能够吃好东西，但是我们知道到生命最后的时间，病人的舒适是最重要的。所以我也见证过一些家人在病人已经不能说话就来走的那一天，他的上午还在给他喂食，而且是用针筒在喂食。我想这真的是很不合适。当时病人已经不能讲话，只能是摇头摇头摇头摇头。但是呢，家人还是觉得我的妈妈怎么能不吃东西呢？
That's right. In the setting of serious terminal illness, even even the person's losing weight, they are not starving to death. It is the cancer that's ending their life. And this is how cancer or heart disease or any other disease interrupts the body's ability to function. Even if they're not eating, they're not starving to death. And it's a really important note for the family member, because it sure feels that way, but it's not. This is what illness does. This is nature.